gentlemen, sorry for the slightly delayed start, but now our speaker is here and the show goes on, right? Okay, so I just wanted a very quick introduction. Professor Patrick O'Sullivan is a professor of ethics and corporate social responsibility in Grenoble and as well as University of Warsaw. For any more, for more self-introduction, I'll leave it to you. Okay, so take it away, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, first of all, I'd just like to apologize for my slight lateness. I had some other sad news from my family, which means I'm going to have to make a trip urgently back to Ireland. That's a long way off. So I was trying to arrange my trip and all that. So my apologies for being a bit late. That's actually what today was. It was news I just got yesterday. So I've been trying to rearrange my trip. But the good news is I'm here for 3 hours this morning. Nick tells me it's at 11 o'clock. But so if people need to go, that's quite all right. Please feel quite free to leave if at any stage you need to. Very quick introduction, a little bit more about myself. Sullivan is fairly predictable, I suppose. And did my first degree in philosophy, politics and economics at University College Dublin 2 many moons ago. I then did my doctorate degree in Italy at the Istituto Universitario Europeo of Florence in Firenze in Italy. Then went and spent 20 years at Cardiff University in the UK. I was at the business school there. Various business ventures while I was there, some very successful. And then, in 2006, I decided I wanted better food and better weather, so I moved to France, to Grenoble, which is in the French Alps. So that's where I'm now based. That's my main position, and also a part-time position as a professor at the University of Warsaw in Poland, and I was there last week. Okay, so enough of that. Let's get on with the business in hand, okay? Which is to talk to you about the Social Progress Index, okay? I'll introduce this with a little bit of background coming from ethics and CSR, but I'll try and move fairly quickly to the practicalities of this index, and specifically why it might be of interest in Thailand, in ASEAN, and so on, okay? But first of all, very quick bit of background on CSR, okay? 15 years ago, you had to defend CSR, you had to actually get up and persuade people that it was important, okay? That's changed. CSR has become relatively mainstream. Yes, there's continuing disagreement about, if you like, how much CSR and how far do we go, but there are very few businesses who would say we have no social responsibility at all, okay? Now that, if you like, reflects the confluence of a number of streams of thought. One of them is applied ethics, okay, just like the journalism in ethics, and medical ethics, and today we have business ethics, okay? And it also partly comes from the critical social theory of the Frankfurt School, okay? Which is a group of thinkers who believe that it is important to develop a critique of society, not for the sake of being critical, but for the sake of improving society. Frankfurt School talks often about the emancipatory role of the social sciences, which is the role of criticizing and therefore showing how the world can be made better. More practical influences come from things like the United Nations, FCCC, anybody know what that stands for, by the way? UNFCCC? Well done, excellent. Yeah, the United Nations Foundation for Prevention of Climate Change. That's a practical influence, which is driving the sustainability agenda. Not the only thing, but it's one thing. And of course, various NGOs have had a big input in promoting CSR. I think of things like Greenpeace, and things like Transparency International, and so on. Okay? So in a sense, therefore, the initial philosophical battle has been won. You don't anymore really have to defend the idea of doing CSR. Now that brings me to an important evolution of the whole CSR, if you like, agenda, which has happened in the past 10 years only, and that is the introduction of the notion of creating shared value. The idea goes back to Michael Porter, okay, who together with his colleague in Harvard, Mark Kramer, wrote two very important articles on this, one 2006, one 2011. And fundamentally fundamentally, Porter's suggestion is that in constructing business strategy today, it's important to think of all the stakeholders, as we call them, and therefore the creation of shared value. Okay? What this means in effect is that it's no longer sufficient for a business simply to take into account shareholders. It becomes important to think of other stakeholders as well. And the goal of the business is conceived by Porter as the creation of shared value for all of the stakeholders. Okay? Which means, doesn't mean abandoning profit, by the way, because after all, if a business completely abandons profit, it will soon go bankrupt. And then it won't do any good to anybody. Okay? So, creating shared value is about creating profit, but at the same time creating value for other stakeholder groups. So that's the creating shared value agenda. And fundamentally, what this means is that a business is being expected to contribute not just to the well-being of stakeholder shareholders, but effectively to social progress, to all of the groups in society. That's what the creation of shared value means as a strategy, and no less an authority than Michael Porter is behind that. Okay? You can find the same demand in the European Union's Charter for Companies, or indeed in the UN Global Compact for Business. Okay, now, that's all just like a little bit of background to this whole thing, right? Because if we decide that we want to create shared value, then another challenge emerges. How are we going to measure it? Okay? Why is the measurement important? Well, you see, if we talk about creating shared value and so on, okay, then in a business context, okay, in a government context as well, particularly in a business context, when we adopt a target, it's pretty fundamental to adopt a way of measuring performance in relation to that target. Okay? So, when any entity or organization sets itself a target, it becomes important, if that target is going to be taken seriously, that there be some way of measuring performance in relation to it. If we don't measure in some sort of way, you end up with a situation where everybody claims they're performing it. And they're saying, yes, we're doing good things for the environment, but if nobody's measuring it, who knows if it's true or not? Okay? Moreover, the policy will drift entirely unless there's some way of saying, this was the policy, and here is what we achieved. Okay? Moreover, it's very difficult to expose greenwashing if you don't have some kind of measure of what being green really means. So, measurement is important, okay? If any goal is to be taken seriously, okay? And in a sense, that's one of the central ideas which underpins and inspire the Social Progress Index, namely the idea of measuring somehow attainment in terms of social progress. Now, incidentally, at any stage if anybody wants to stop me and ask me questions, please do. Okay? Some of the things I'm saying invite being challenged, okay? And I don't mind being challenged. So at any stage, be quite free to put me hand and say, what about this and what about that? Okay, so measurement challenge then, to explain what it is. Now, there are two levels at which you can measure this performance. One is the micro level, at the level of the individual organization, and the other is the macro level, at the level of society as a whole, or something like that. Okay? Now, at micro level, there isn't really any universal indicator of, if you like, social performance for business. There is, of course, the economic indicator, which is the profit bottom line. It's well established, but that tells you, if you like, about the economic sustainability of the business. Okay? There are indicators of other things. On the environmental front, for example, you can measure things like carbon footprint. Okay? And there are other environmental measures as well. Okay? But none of them are universal. None has the universality of the triple bottom of the profit bottom line. It's true that John Elkington suggested the idea of the triple bottom line. which would be triple bottom line sustainability being people, planet, profit. So in NQ's view, companies should report on their economic sustainability, which is their profitability, their environmental impact, and their impact on society. How to measure that he wasn't so clear on. Okay? In any case, the purpose of today's talk is not to talk about micro measures, but more about macro measures, okay? And what I'm going to introduce you to is an index in which I feel a certain part, okay, which is why I can speak to you about it in such detail, namely the Social Progress Index. Now, the Social Progress Index, what does it aim to be? Okay? It's a macro level measure, and it's seeking to measure social progress for societies taken as a whole. Now, the next question arises, what's a society? Yes. Well, we began from nation states. Okay? Why? Because there's a lot of data available for nation states. Okay? But you could, and we have already developed social progress index for regions, for example. We developed a social progress index for the Amazon region in Brazil, of all places. Okay? Municipalities. A social progress index is being developed for the city of Detroit, and the city of Somerville in the US, and then it is ongoing for various other municipalities which may be interesting. Okay? So, the social progress index, although it began life as an index for nation states, you can actually bring it down to lower levels, and I'll just hint this briefly at the end, it might even have applications for individual businesses. I'll explain to you again how that might be. But let's concentrate on the macro measure. Okay, now, when we look at macro measurement, the most commonly used indicator of a country or performance today is, of course, GDP, gross domestic product. Gross domestic product has its used by every country in the world, except Bhutan, okay? And it's a well-established measure, okay? Now, it has the advantage, like the profit bottom line, that it's simple, easy to measure, and everybody measures it, okay? But it's a crude indicator in relation to well-being, okay? Because essentially, it measures an input to well-being, okay? In other words, the GDP measures the sum total of production of goods and services in the community in a given period. Okay, so tell you something about the material goods and services being produced. Okay? Is well-being reducible to material goods and services? Well, probably fairly obvious to not entirely reducible to it. Therefore, GDP is limited as a measure in relation to well-being. Okay? Now, there haven't been many alternatives, as I said, to the profit bottom line, but the field of alternatives to GDP has become quite crowded in recent years. Okay? I'm going to talk to you about not just the SPI, social progress index, but about some of the other indicators as well, just to give you an idea of how vibrant the field is at present. Okay? And you know, sometimes when I was preparing these talks, I was just thinking about the history of science, and I thought, you know, if I think of how many different places in the world and many different initiatives are going on to develop measures other than GDP, it reminds me of the story of differential calculus. Now, what's the story of differential calculus? Anybody remember what that is? How was it discovered? An interesting story, actually. In fact, differential calculus was simultaneously discovered by Isaac Newton in England and Gottfried Leibniz in Germany, okay, in the same year, okay, and neither of them knew of the other's work, okay. Newton was levering away on a problem which had become quite important in relation to the laws of motion, basically how to mathematically model speed, acceleration and things like that, okay? Leibniz was working away the same thing at the same time.
And in the same year, they discovered differential calculus. Okay? Now it's a bit like that with these social indicators, where lots of people in lots of different countries working on the problem in different ways, and hopefully eventually we'll come towards a single index. But more of that later, okay? So there's a crescendo of awareness that we need something better than GDP, or at least something to complement GDP. Nice question if we want to replace it or complement it. Okay, we actually think the best thing to do is to complement it. Okay? Now, whether that will lead to a universal measure or not is a good question. But one of the convictions that we have at SPI is that any new index needs to be universal. Right? It needs to be universal in nature. Okay? And that for a fairly practical reason, that it will be important when we develop a new index, that index should be capable of being compared across countries. Okay? You know, if for example Thailand develops its own index, which is completely different from Bhutan's index. Bhutan is an index which is completely different from Germany's index. And Germany's a different index from Italy. Well, you know, you won't be able to say much by way of comparison of performance among countries if they all have completely different indexes. So there's a pragmatic argument for universality. Okay? And that, as I say, is one of the central aims of the index. Okay? Now, what we want is some kind of an index which will act as a universal indicator of social progress throughout the world. That's quite a big challenge, okay? And that leads me to a brief, what I call philosophical parenthesis. Now, I won't make this too detailed because probably not many of you in the room are philosophers, okay? So what we'll go to the slides, I'll just explain very quickly what I mean by this, okay? There is, if you like, a philosophical elephant, as we say in French, right? Out there in the corridor, lying behind all this, okay? Statisticians are doing their work and they're measuring things, but there is a big philosophical elephant, okay? Elephant, by the way, is one of the French is a big problem, okay? That doesn't dare come into the room and remind you, okay? Now, what is this this kind of philosophical elephant? Well, if we are going to create an index of social progress, that means we're going to decide what progress is. And that's not as straightforward as it might seem. But one thing is for sure, that if we're going to talk about progress, we're going to be making what social scientists call value judgments. We're going to say, this social situation is better than this one. We have made progress in getting here to there. That means we're going to pass value judgments. Okay? Now, for some social scientists, for many management theorists, trained in the Anglo-American tradition, that's shocking. Okay? Because in the positivist Anglo-American tradition, you learn you keep value judgments out of social science. Okay? Well, I'm sorry, but if you're going to measure social progress, you're going to have to make value judgments. You can't avoid them. Now, interestingly, yeah, please.
When you talk about value, are you linking the word value with an economic new market?
No, I mean it in the moral sense. Value judgment in the sense of passing a moral judgment. This is a better situation than this one, okay? In the sense of contributing to well-being.
But this is well-being creating a new market, economic market.
It might or might not.
Because the interesting thing today is that, I mean, you spend time in Europe, so you already heard about that, but in Europe, they add in the GDP like the black market of the different countries.
Sure.
Which is a crazy thing because indirectly it means that the black market becomes legal.
In a way, but value is being added to the black market.
So, yeah, of course, because
And
the black market is taking care of people.
But we mean more than that, but that would be one sort of implication. We're talking about value judgments in the much wider philosophical sense of saying that, for example, let me give you an example. Ending or eradicating a killer disease is a good thing. Okay? They're saying it's good for human beings. Okay, there's no necessarily money value on it, but if we manage to eradicate, for example, malaria in a country, okay, we're saying that's a good thing. Okay, that's a value judgment saying that what improves people's health is morally a good thing. It's moral value judgments I'm talking about, okay? And my thesis is that in order to talk about social progress, you cannot avoid making some moral value judgments.
I think it changes also the economical approach because, for example, if you see health insurance in Europe, now they are more and more covering you to get some anticipated care because they think that it is better to spend a little bit more every year to anticipate the disease.
That's true, yeah.
Because it's going to be cheaper to manage than the real disease actually. So in the sense, it contributes to enhance the social.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't want you to think that moral value and economic value are necessarily opposed to each other. No. That's why at the beginning I said about creating shared value. Creating shared value is all about improving the world and at the same time making profits. Okay? So there's nothing in this to say that profit is bad. Oh, that would be an awful mistake to think that. Okay? But what we're saying is that if we're going to decide what is a better society, it's not just about bigger GDP. There may be more to it. That's what we're saying. Okay? Now, so that's the first philosophical elephant out there. We're going to have to make value judgments. Now, as a social scientist, that should not necessarily be so shocking, because the great Swedish economist Gunnar Myrdal, way back in the 1960s, wrote another important book that everybody then forgot about called Value and Social Theory. Myrdal was a development economist, he wrote some great works, but he wrote a book called Value and Social Theory, in which he pointed out that in social science, actually you cannot avoid value judgments. He pointed out that even in the selection of the topics we decide to research, there are value judgments. Okay, so for example, if you decide to, if you're deciding, if you're an academic, what your research is going to be, you don't just sort of roll a dice and say, well, let's see, if 6 comes up, I'll research unemployment, if 5 comes up, I'll research insurance, and if 4 comes up, I'll research environment and so on. No, it's not like that. We actually choose the things we want to research because we think they're important in some way. Okay? So for example, Nick probably thinks sustainability is important. That's why he got involved in a centre like this. Okay? But there's an underlying inspirational value judgment. Okay? So that's the first thing that Myrdal pointed out. He also pointed out that many of the theories of social science involve implicit value judgments about people. Okay? So when we recall Myrdal, we say, okay, well, actually, it's not so shocking to have value judgments present in social science. Now the second question that comes up then, okay, so we've no hang-up about making our value judgments. Which ones? Now this is also a philosophical elephant because if we're going to create an index which aims to be universal, upon what valued judgments can we draw? Okay, now of course, this is potentially very controversial because not everybody necessarily shares the same value judgments. Now, our thesis is that actually there are some universal value judgments, and they're the ones we use to build the social progress index. Now there are two fundamental lines of thinking we draw on. The first one is natural rights theory. Okay? Why natural rights theory? Well, there is a thing called the UN Declaration of Human Rights. 192 countries in the world who are members of the United Nations. They have signed up in principle with respect to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So, in theory, not in practice, every country in the world subscribes to that. So we say, let us take our value judgment from the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and we're on relatively universal territory there. Okay? When I show you the detail of the index, I'll show you the inspiration and how the bits and pieces come from the Natural Declaration of Human Rights. But another key distinction we had to make, okay, was the distinction between happiness and what the Greeks called eudaimonia. Okay? Now the word eudaimonia in Greek meant he who had a good destiny. God had smiled upon him. Okay? the Greeks today, the gods don't seem to be smiling on them very much, but okay. But eudaimonia meant a well-fated person, okay? A notion which has a kind of first cousin in ideas of good karma in Eastern thinking, okay? Now, eudaimonia in Greek meant something much wider than just physical happiness. See, in the Anglo-American world, the idea of happiness somehow got narrowed down for about the late 1700s, the idea of physical pleasure, okay? With minor little variants in that, okay? But fundamentally, utilitarianism, as a leading kind of moral philosophy in the American, okay, one of them thinks of well-being as simply happiness. You ask him, are you happy? Are you feeling happy? If the answer is yes, there we go, that's very good. You've got a high level of utility, okay? And then pretty explicitly, who was the founder of the union, talked about, goodness me, increasing people's happiness, okay? Well, it's not necessarily a very bad thing, but the eudaimonia tradition says it's a bit more subtle than that, okay? In the eudaimonic tradition, Aristotle and Plato, who founded that tradition, both spoke of the notion of the golden mean, okay? Well, the golden mean is very interesting concept. For them, eudaimonia, true well-being, involved a sort of middle path, okay? And they call that the golden mean. And what it basically meant was that to reach true well-being, you needed to avoid excess in all things, okay? So for, the classic example is alcohol, okay? A little bit of alcohol is a good thing, okay? And too much of it can end up being a very bad thing, okay? So, same with food, certain amount of good food, of course, what a pleasure. Become totally held on food, you end up with obesity and health problems and so on. So, that's the eudaimonic tradition. Now, we've gone for that. We've said, we're not necessarily going to say that it's all about just increasing people's subjectively experienced short-term happiness. We're saying, we're going to look at eudaimonia. Now, of course, speaking in Thailand, you can see the links with Eastern thinking here, okay? There is the definite first cousin relationship between the golden mean and the middle path of Buddhism, okay? So, that we regard also as a strength of the index, that by adopting the eudaimonia conception, we're adopting an idea about well-being which can fit with Eastern as well as with Western type values, and therefore has some claim to universality. Now, that's really what I wanted to say about, as I say, the philosophical elephant, okay? If this was a philosophy class, we could spend the rest of the morning discussing those points. But let's move on to the next section of my slides, which are about where we go from here. Any questions, by the way, about those normative foundations? All happy? Okay. All right, so back now to the feet a bit more inert. We've talked about the philosophical element. I've laid out my stall. I've admitted, openly said what are the values we're drawing on. Now, let's see what we're going to do with this. Okay? Now, the easiest way to tackle the construction of a new index is to think about the limitations of GDP. Because by understanding the limitations of GDP, we'll have an understanding of what we want in a new and better index. Okay? Now, GDP, as we mentioned earlier, measures the sum total of the goods and services produced in a particular area in a particular period. Okay? And it's no more and no less than a measure of aggregate production. We can measure it per head of population by simply dividing through the country's GDP by its population, and we get GDP per capita. And this is the one which is often taken as some kind of an indirect measure of well-being. Okay? Now, there is a tenuous relationship, okay, in the sense that if we produce lots more goods and services, well, in theory, people should be capable of being a bit better off. But you can think of some catches. The first one is how are they distributed? Okay? If there's an increase in GDP and it all goes to one person, one simple said that the society is gained. Okay, that's an extreme case. But the distribution of the increase in GDP is something that we might need to think about. But also, at best, material goods are only an input to well-being. They're not well-being in itself. Okay? They are something which can help to make people better off, but they don't automatically and necessarily make people better off. Okay? In addition to that, there are a whole array of other things, okay, which could be affecting well-being. Okay? Now, if we had a situation where all those other things, suppose there were all these other things, A, B, C, D, E, F, that we thought were important for well-being. Now, if those A, B, C, D, E, F were the same across all societies, then we could use GDP per head and say, okay, that's a measure, because the other things are constant across the societies. And the other thing that's different is the GDP per head. So that would be a possible way to defend GDP. You could say, well look, Patrick, I know that GDP per head is not the whole story, but you know, the other things are constant across societies. Okay? Now, the catch is that the other things are not constant across societies. And essentially, Simon Kuznets, who was the man who developed the GDP in the first place, writing at Harvard in the 1930s, okay, developed the national accounts, initially for military purposes, the US military actually, okay. But when he was called into a congressional committee to give evidence on this, he told the committee, I'll paraphrase, but I could look up the exact quote, he said, I would advise you, ladies and gentlemen, not to use this index as a measure of well-being, because it's not. Okay? He was as blunt as that. He said it would be dangerous to use it as a measure of well-being. But you know, people ignore often the wisdom of great men. Okay? Now, those are the things, as I said, that contribute to well-being are not the same across all societies. Let me give you a little list I made earlier. Here we go. All of the things I put up there clearly affect people's well-being. Environmental degradation. Okay? Now, if you don't believe me, go to Beijing. On a good smoky day. Yeah, it affects people's well-being, affects their health, it's not very pleasant to breathe in, and so on. Or who wants to live right next door to a nuclear power station? So, environmental degradation exists, it impacts people's well-being, it is not the same across societies, okay? Vanuatu has no problems with environmental degradation. Beijing has, and there are various places in between the extremes. Health of the population. Health clearly affects people's well-being. You know, if you're unhealthy, well, you know, you don't feel that great. It doesn't exactly help you to have a great and fulfilling life. That's fairly obvious. Educational level of the population. Yeah, university professors certainly presume that that improves people's well-being. Some people might not be so sure, but most people probably agree that higher level of education and attainment does help you to have a higher level of self-fulfillment and so on. Peace and security in the community. Nobody would deny that, okay? Living in a peaceful community where people are non-violent towards each other makes life more pleasant. Obvious, okay? Tolerance and goodwill among people, okay? Tolerance being one of the most tolerant countries in the world right at this moment, okay? One of the reasons why Thailand has such a good reputation in the world has something to do with the tolerance and goodwill Thais show among themselves and indeed to others, okay? These things make life more pleasant and more fulfilling. Free goods available. What are free goods, by the way? Give me an example of a free good. Milton Friedman said there's no such thing as a free lunch, by the way, right? Was he right? Well, what's a free good? beach around. Somebody said, what was the other one?
Air.
Air, absolutely. Air, seawater, climate. Okay, you have it. You're stuck with it. Okay, but where it's a pleasant climate, it's a pretty good. Okay, and obviously different parts of the world have different climates and so on. You know, there's an awful lot of very cheap land available in Siberia. People aren't rushing there. Guess why? The free good of the climate. Okay, it's terribly cold for most of you. And the amount of leisure time available. Okay? More leisure you have, more time for self-fulfillment and so on. The amount of leisure time people have varies widely across societies. Now, the point is, these things vary across societies. And by the way, I just could have gone on. Okay? I've just given you some very easy examples. Okay? All of these things affect people's well-being. All of them are present in different degrees in different societies. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I mentioned, the A, B, C, D, E, F, are not constant across societies, and therefore GDP cannot be used as a measure of well-being. There are far too many other things that differ widely across societies that are just not in GDP. So clearly, therefore, we need to go beyond GDP, okay? Towards other measures, okay? Now, as I mentioned, it's a bit like Newton and Leibniz. There are lots of initiatives with regard to other measures going on at present. And what I'm going to do now is talk to you about what some of those measures are, okay? Now, of course, I think the SBI is the best of the efforts that have been made, but I want to underline that I have the highest respect for all of these other initiatives. Basically, we're all working towards the same goal, okay? So, let's take a look at some of these. Some of you may know about some of these already. The first major alternative index, which appeared on the scene in the early 1990s, was the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index, developed by two economists, Sen and Untitled, on behalf of the UNIDO, United Nations International Development Organization, okay? And they developed an index which included two new elements. Life expectancy, taken as an indicator of healthiness in the population, and the education level of the population, just measured simply by percentage of the population with primary school attainment, percentage of secondary, percentage with university. Okay? These were combined together in a weighted geometric average to give you a thing called the Human Development Index. By the way, anybody know what country in the world has the longest life expectancy? Japan, yes. So despite all those nuclear stations, Japan has the highest.
Not in Tokyo.
Well, that very well be, that's true. But for the country as a whole, it has got the highest life expectancy, right? Yeah.
Should be UNDP, not UNDP.
Ah, sorry.
You're
You're right. You're right. You're right indeed. Okay? Right, that's correct. There's a second version of the index, by the way, which includes inequality, okay? Because there were some critiques made of the initial index saying, well, you know, that's all very fine, but you've said nothing about the degree to which the wealth is shared in society. We should also be having the inequality measure. So there's also an inequality adjusted HDI, which includes Gini coefficient. That actually does change the ranking of countries in the world, by the way. Not dramatically, but significantly. Now, Human Development Index, it's the first attempt to go beyond GDP, and to that extent, good, but you can see from what we just said earlier that it's very limited, because just look at my list a moment ago. This wasn't exhaustive. This is not treated HDI. This, yes, it's there, measured by life expectancy. This, yes, it's there. This, no. This, no. This, no. This, no. Okay? So, HDI, yeah, great, step in the right direction, but very limited index, okay? Now, the next index, and in order of historical appearance, is, of course, Bhutan's gross national happiness index. And probably many people in Thailand know a little bit about this. In Europe, you talk about this, people say, oh, I've heard of this before, okay? But out in Thailand, you've probably heard of it, okay? Now, the gross national happiness index was developed in Bhutan, which is a largely Buddhist country, okay? And in fact, the king of Bhutan took the decision, some 20 years ago, to abandon measurement of GDP and to replace it with the measure known as the Gross National Happiness Index. Well, the Gross National Happiness Index has been going for some time, okay, and it's become quite a sophisticated index, okay. Here's how it's structured, okay. The GNH is based on 4 pillars: socioeconomic sustainability, good governance, cultural preservation, and environmental preservation, okay? And those 4 are then measured by 9 major indicators. And here are the 9 indicators that go into GNH. Psychological well-being, right? You can measure that by various kinds of psychological survey. Health, straightforward. Education. Time use. GNH is paying attention to the leisure question. Cultural resilience, okay? A relatively vague concept, but has something to do with cultural identity and things like that, okay? Good governance, which refers to the quality of the political system and people's ability to participate in it, okay? Community vitality, relatively vague concept. Ecological diversity and resilience, a very clear environmental measure, and living standards. Now, living standards are not measured by GDP per head, they're measured by some kind of consumption measure. Of course, consumption is one of the biggest components in GDP. So notice that gross national happiness does pay a little bit of attention to the economic well-being question and the GDP, not GDP per head, but some kind of a measure of living standards. Okay? And that's an index which deserves the height of respect, okay? I have some reservations about it, okay? It's probably my favourite after SPI, but I have some reservations about it, okay? One thing is that there's a persistent tendency there to measure partly by input as opposed to happiness or good the output, okay? Let me just go back one slide again. Something like cultural resilience, okay? Are we sure that that necessarily increases people's well-being? Or are we making a judgment saying, well, we think it does, so we'll include it, okay? Whereas something like psychological well-being, that's a straight measure of are people ending up feeling happier, or feeling better in some sense, okay? Right? Whereas here, we're saying, well, we think this is going to contribute, but we're not entirely sure. And of course, living standards, as we said earlier, maybe they do, maybe they don't contribute to well-being, okay? It's an input as opposed to an output measure, okay? So there is a little bit of a tendency to confuse the input and output measures. The other limitation, which is not really a limitation, is that nobody's ever really taken it seriously outside Bhutan, okay? So Bhutan measures gross national happiness, nobody else has to date used it. That may change, okay? I noticed that there's a big conference in November in Bhutan about the gross national happiness index. I've suggested to my colleagues at SCI that we should be present. We should begin the dialogue with these guys. Okay? Okay. Now, another major initiative is a thing called the World Happiness Report. This is an initiative of the UN General Assembly. Okay? Now, the WHR is very much inspired by the utilitarian conception. The utilitarian conception, okay? The General Assembly said, well, it would be nice to know if people are happy, okay? So, a group was commissioned to develop a thing called the World Happiness Report, and they've been doing an excellent work, okay? Measuring happiness, okay? And it's done by a massive world survey. Much of the work is conducted from like Gallup poll, okay, where they go and ask people, excuse me, why are you feeling happy today? Okay? Now you can see some of the dangers of this, okay? But to be fair to the World Happiness Report, they are pretty sophisticated in what the way they do it. Because if I ask you, are you happy? Oh, who knows? Depends on how much you drank last night. It depends what's happening in your personal life. It depends on whether holidays are happening next week. Okay? As well as asking the question, are you feeling happy today, or have you been happy in the last 24 hours, the World Happiness Report also asks a series of much broader happiness questions like, are you happy with your life? Okay? Broadly speaking, are you happy with your family life, are you happy with your social relations and so on? Okay? So it is a fairly sophisticated measure, but it is still utilitarian. Okay? There is no allowance for eudaimonia in that. If people tell you they're happier, they must be happier. Okay? There is no real attention to whether or not people might be feeling happier, thinking they're happy. The danger, in a sense, with happiness indices like this is that people could be living in a fool's paradise. They could think they're happy when a disaster is about to happen. Okay? Self-made disasters, there's always environmental disasters. But you may be living in a way which is quietly destroying your health, for example. Okay? And the WHO would not pick that up. Okay? But that being said, their measures of happiness are very sophisticated, and they use things called Cantrell ladders. Cantrell ladder is a bit like a Likert scale, but it goes from 0 to 10. So, when you're asked, to rank, are you feeling happy today, or are you feeling happy with your life? You're asked to do it on a scale that goes from 0 to 10, where you say very one scale. Okay? And that's called a Cantrell ladder. Okay? It's a tool developed by psychologists. Okay? So, plenty of respect for this, although we can see limitations. Now, another point about the World Happiness Report is that it includes GDP per capita as one of its elements. Okay? So, as well as measuring the psychological survey stuff, it also includes GDP per capita. Okay? That is perhaps a limitation because it means it's an input-based approach. Okay, that was the World Happiness Report. Another index, the Happy Planet Index. Alright? Sums up, doesn't it? Okay? Again, very much worth respect. This index seeks to address rigorously one of the key specific limitations of the GDP, namely environmental pollution. Okay? Now, the Happy Planet Index, the root people call it the Tree Hoppers Index, okay? Well, actually, its central concern is with measuring the environmental impact of human activity. To be fair, it doesn't aim to be a comprehensive measure of well-being. It aims to be a measure of well-being that takes into account the environmental factor. HPI does not include GDP. Okay? It's the first index we've come across that doesn't actually include, apart from the gross national happiness, which does not include GDP. It takes a composite measure composed of subjective happiness, measured in the same sort of rate, the same sort of place as the World Happiness Report, multiplies that by life expectancy at birth, as in the Human Development Index, and then divides that by ecological footprint, typically measured by things like carbon footprint. Okay? So basically, you're saying, are we making people happier? How long are people living? They're both good things. And then we're subtracting out, if you like, the ecological footprint that's all having. Okay? Because if this thing is psychological happiness multiplied by life expectancy divided by the ecological footprint in logarithmic terms, that would be the log of happiness plus the log of life expectancy minus the log of the ecological footprint. So basically, that's what you're doing. Okay. Now, Happy Planet Index is a good initiative, certainly, but it's limited. Okay. But to be fair, if you look at the Happy Planet Index website, they fully admit that there Our index is partial. It's looking only at one aspect of overall well-being. Okay? It's an incomplete index if you take it on its own. Okay? So, then there's the OECD's Better Life Index. Okay? Now, this index is intriguing. Okay? It's got a very wide set of things in it. Okay? It's got a very interesting way of being constructed. It's constructed participatively online. It's the sort of index which you couldn't have had before the internet age. Okay? So let me explain how it works, Better Life Index, okay? People are invited to go online and simply rate and weight various aspects of their lives, okay? They rate them in terms of importance and they give a weight to how important things are. Okay? Now, what are the things they're asked to rate in the Better Life Index? Material wealth and income, GDP, quality of work experience, housing quality, health, education, social relationships, personal security, social inclusion, and subjective well-being. Okay, they're the main things, but it's a very big list, okay? So the Better Life Index is asking you to rate a lot of things, okay? And as I say, when you go online and you take the survey, you put in your weights, saying how important these various things are. Now, that's certainly a good initiative. It's a fairly sophisticated index. It's got a long and wide list of things that are being taken into account. Okay? But there is a philosophical limitation in the implicit value judgments of people now. Because you see, if you let the participants rank the importance of the elements, okay, you're effectively accepting their value judgments. Now that sounds very democratic, okay? Sounds reasonable enough, okay? But unfortunately, it does open the door to two problems. One is the possibility of big inconsistencies. People may be evaluating rating things quite differently, and so you may get a lot of sort of confusion emerging, okay? But secondly, you also open the door to quite reprehensible value judgments, okay? There might be, for example, racists who are, in a very strange way, ranking the importance of various things. Okay? In Europe, we've got a big problem with that at present. Okay? In a number of countries, there's big problems with racism and religious intolerance. Okay? Which are feeding them themselves, and so on. That's why you've got the Front National in France, and you've got the UKIP in the UK, and so on. These parties are not notorious for the level of racial equality and so on. Okay, so I would have worries about that. There's also, of course, like in the world, how can support the danger of blissful ignorance? People might be rating things in a way whereby they are unaware of certain dangers they're creating for themselves for the future. Okay, so OECD Better Life Index, yes, good initiative. Nice and sophisticated, but some problems. One is, I'm not so sure about letting people make their own value judgments, okay? I'm worried about blissful ignorance, and of course, the Better Life Index also relates only to the OECD countries, okay? Which is only 24 countries in the world. But that could be extended, okay? You could imagine extending the index beyond that, so that's not an insuperable problem. Another one I should mention, Sustainable Society Index. That is an effort to measure the sustainability of the socio-economic system, okay? It is only a sustainability measure, therefore it's not a complete measure. But the Sustainable Society Index doesn't claim to be a comprehensive measure. Incidentally, given the centre we're in, suppose I asked you the question about how sustainable the way the world is behaving today. Suppose I asked you a very concrete question like this. If every citizen of the world were to be brought up to the level of living of an average European, okay? it would take 2.5 planets under current technology, okay? In terms of food resources, in terms of energy resources, and so on. Okay? That's very sobering, okay? The way we're living is totally unsustainable. Okay, because every time, oh yes, we want better living standards, we want to be, an average European is not necessarily all that, well off, but they're a reasonably comfortable standard of living, okay? But if everyone to live at the level of an average European, we'd need, it varies between 2.5 and 3 planets is what we need to provide the resources. So yeah, we're living in a very unsustainable way, and that is a time bomb of living to go. Okay? Other indices I can mention in passing. Poland has developed a balanced development index, okay? It's quite specific to the Polish context. It's about balanced development as opposed to well-being. It's kind of a cross between a well-being index and sustainability index. Germany has the W3 index, which is quite like the OECD's index, incidentally, okay? And the Italians are merely developing the benessere e sostenibile, which means a fair and sustainable well-being index. That's being developed by the Italian Statistical Office, ISTA, okay, and it's quite a sophisticated index as well. The limitations of these are from one country, okay, but it does show you that there's an awful lot going on around the world. Okay, so there are the alternatives, okay? Now I want to move on and talk about the social progress index. Before I talk specifically about SPI, any questions? All okay so far? Alright, let's see about SPI then. Okay? What's going on here? Well, this social progress index was born only in 2013. It's only 2 years old. Imagine that, okay? And the index seeks to take into account the limitations and lessons from some of the previous attempts, okay? Certainly, we've tried to learn with SPI from some of the pitfalls that some of the other indices have fallen into, okay? Just a little bit about who's behind it, okay? It's an initiative of a grouping called the Social Progress Imperative. Now, the Social Progress Imperative is an international group of scholars and leaders from the private, NGO and public fields devoted to the promotion and improvement of people's lives around the world. The initiative actually began in Costa Rica, okay? And it's a non-profit entity which is aimed fundamentally to improving people's well-being. Now, it is supported by politicians, for example, in Paraguay, in the Basque Country, various NGOs have supported it, okay? Various private sector entities have supported it. For example, Deloitte, a big accounting firm, has given major support to the Social Progress Imperative, as of the Ecole Foundation and others. Okay, but if you look at the Social Progress Imperative website, you can see quite a diverse range of people who are involved. Okay, and obviously there are academics involved on the technical side. And the Social Progress Imperative quickly reached the conclusion that measuring social progress was important to the work of actually achieving social progress. That's the point about measurement of earlier on. Now, we were very lucky that at an early stage, and this was even before I came on board, okay, that Michael Porter from Harvard got on the bandwagon thinking this is an excellent initiative, okay? And Porter is in fact in many ways the public face. Now, Porter brought on board also Scott Stern from Massachusetts Technology. Scott is a world-class econometrician, so he defines the statistical part of the index, and the research team is led by Michael Green. Michael Green is an ex-academic who worked then for 10 years in the British civil service at Whitehall, and now is chief executive of the Social Progress Imperative. Antonio Ranibar, who is from the public sector in Costa Rica, a very important person inside SPI, and Amy Wares, who's a statistician. Then in 2014, I became involved to deal with the philosophical and conceptual side of the inputs, okay? The social purpose imperative team, by the way, consists of approximately 10 people, right? It's incredibly small, okay? The only people I haven't mentioned are Jaime, who's one of the statistical crunchers, and Sarah Orzel and Mark Esposito. That's it. That's what the social purpose imperative is today. Oh, and Justin Pace in Washington. Okay, so we're just 10 people. Okay, so we're making a big splash for just 10 people. A quarter is big enough to have in. Okay, so what does the social purpose industry aim to do? It seeks to take into account the limitations and lessons from previous attempts, and through consolidation and refinement, to develop a universal indicator. Okay, so one very fundamental decision that was made right at the beginning was to adopt an output-based rather than an input-based approach to the measurement of well-being. Okay? In other words, rather than assuming that this or that contributes to well-being, we're going to try and measure well-being. Okay? And we're pretty systematic about this. Now, how we've done that will become very clear when I actually put up the full list of indicators. Okay? Another key point of difference that we took, or which we took a decision in the early stage, was to exclude GDP per capita from the index, okay? Now, why did we make such a big and important decision, okay? First of all, GDP is only an input, okay? So, in an output-based approach, you cannot have GDP involved, okay? But secondly, here's an important consideration. Apart from the fact that GDP makes no allowance for things like leisure time, okay? Suppose you ask the question, in paradise, what would the value of GDP be? There's the answer, 0. So you wouldn't have to work, you see. In paradise, you could just do what you wanted all the time. You have all the things you want available freely from the trees and so on. In paradise, GDP would be 0. Okay? And that tells you that there's something conceptually wrong about including GDP in an index of well-being, because if you push just the limit, okay, actually put out to 0. Okay? So pushing up GDP in the limit case doesn't necessarily increase well-being. Second consideration, we do lots of damage to the environment, okay? And then we often end up cleaning it up. In GDP terms, what that means is we make a mess, then when we clean up the mess and try to bring well-being back to where it was before, we actually push up GDP. Okay? So activities in GDP designed to clean up messes we've made seem to be pushing up well-being, when all we're doing is trying to keep well-being constant. Okay? So notice that in certain important respects, okay, pushing up GDP is not actually pushing up well-being. It's, not even, maybe not, definitely not. Any activities that are involved in cleaning up pollution, and there are plenty of those, by the way, okay, they are not increasing well-being. They're at best pulling back well-being to where it was before we messed up the environment. Okay? So there are very good conceptual reasons, therefore, for excluding GDP. And as I say, the instances of environmental pollution are far from being isolated, as participants in this sector know very well. Okay? Another advantage, by the way, of excluding GDP is that it does allow us afterwards to ask the question, is there any link between GDP per capita and well-being, and to what extent is there? In other words, we can do statistical correlation analysis after the event and say, here's what a country's GDP looks like, here's what its SPI looks like, are they correlated? And I'll show you the answer to that shortly. Okay? But if we had GDP in the index, we couldn't ask that question. You'd be prejudging that question by including it in the index. Okay. Now, next important general point about SPI is where do we get our indicators? The SPI does not measure any of its own indicators, okay? 13 or 10 people, that's not entirely surprising, okay? All of the indicators we're using come from other sources, okay? And we look to very reliable sources and so on, okay? There are 52 indicators, the 52 indicators come from a wide variety of other sources. The index is grouped under 3 dimensions and 4 components, which I'll explain in a moment, okay? Now, just looking at the sources of indicators, you've got things like FAO, UNESCO, country intelligence units, and so on. And in fact, here is a slide which gives you a full list of the sources that we use for our data in 2015. 52 indicators were drawn from the following sources, okay? First of all, we call hard data sources. UN World Bank sources, UNESCO, WHO, Program for Water Supply, Food and Agriculture, and so on. They're all UN statistics, okay, or World Bank, okay? Other hard data sources are a bit more specific. Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, World Resources Institute, Barrowly Education Assessment, OECD Development Center, Yale University, and so on. These are the hard data centers, okay? And they're pretty reliable sources. I won't say they're 100% reliable, but they're resources which in principle are free from political manipulation, okay? Then we have over here 2 main survey sources. Gallup World Poll is used for some of the stuff about freedom and so on that we'll see later on. Okay, and the World Economic Forum is used for one indicator. And then we have expert assessments. Okay, the Institute for Economics and Peace, Tingarelli Richards Human Rights Data Set, Pew Research Center, Freedom House, Fund for Peace, Heritage Foundation, Reporters Without Borders, that's used for the Press Freedom Index, Transparency International, that's the anti-corruption group, and the university rankings, okay? Okay, so there are data sources. You'll notice that 60% of the data are coming from hard data sources, okay? So a very wide range of sources are used, and we think that they're pretty reliable sources, okay? And there is how the index is structured, okay? So it's just represented, structured in these 3 dimensions, okay? Basic human needs, relations to well-being, and opportunity. Now, looking at those, if you said to me, oh, I see Maslow, yeah, you wouldn't be too far wrong, okay? Now, we didn't explicitly think of Maslow when we were actually developing this, okay? But certainly you can see the influence. Basic human needs are laying, making sure you can live, survival, okay? Foundations of well-being are beginning to move to a somewhat higher stage. And of course, opportunities for the self-actualization phase in the Maslow pyramid, okay? But the reason we're saying this is not directly Maslow, of course, is that we find, when we look around the world, that there are bits of these present in pretty much most countries, okay? Whereas if you restrict Maslowian and say there are countries which are only here, and there are countries which are this and this, and there are other countries with this, this, and this. But in fact, what we find, all of these are to some extent present in all the countries of the world. Okay? But, if you see a kind of relation to Maslow, you'd be correct about that. Now, within this, these 3 dimensions, we then have for each one 4 components. Okay? And these components are common to every version of the index. That's to say, for every country, for every municipality, or what's on a measure SPI, we need measures on all of these 12 components. So these remain invariant across any version of the index. Basic human needs are measured by nutrition, basic medical care, water and sanitation, shelter, and personal safety. Okay, hard to argue with those. Foundations of well-being, access to basic knowledge, access to information and communications, health and wellness, ecosystem sustainability. Okay? And then opportunity, personal rights, personal freedom of choice, tolerance and inclusion, access to advanced education. Okay? Now, you can probably hear a little bit of the natural rights in the background there, and you'd be right, okay? These are very basic rights. The right to live in peace and security is the first right in Law Street as it is on government, okay? The right to healthcare, the right to education, okay? The right to freedom of thought, and so on, okay? The right to freedom to practice religion. All of these things are natural rights, and they're cropping up in these 12 indicators, okay? These 12 components.
What about legal systems?
Yeah, legal system we think of as an input, not an output. Okay, that would be the word system. Yeah. We then come to the indicators, the 52 indicators. So, the big headings here are the components you recognize: nutrition, basic medical, health, sanitation, shelter, personal safety, and so on. Okay, so for each component, we then have indicators, okay? So for example, for nutrition, basic healthcare, we have indicators of undernourishment, depth of food deficit, maternal mortality rate, child mortality rate, and death from infectious diseases, okay? And those, we are saying, will give us an indicator of the level of nutrition, basic medical care in any society, okay? And why do we choose these, okay? Well, largely pragmatic reasons. I mean, they're measuring pretty much directly what we want to measure anyway, but we also have good data for them, okay? There's good published data on them from UN sources, okay? Just take another one over here, health and wellness, okay? Okay, so we want to measure health and wellness. How do we do it? We say we take these 5 indicators: life expectancy, premature death from non-communicable diseases, obesity rate, because obesity is well known to reduce health, okay? Outdoor air pollution attributable deaths, okay? And suicide rate, okay? Which is to do with how well we feel, okay? Suicide rate is a good indicator of how depressed or otherwise people feel, and that's part of health and wellness. It's not basic health, but it is part of wellness, if you like. So there are indicators there, okay? Just take one from this lot over here. This one always gets a great giggle. Tolerance and inclusion. Well, we have tolerance for immigrants, tolerance for homosexuals, discrimination and violence against minorities, religious tolerance, and community safety net. Okay? Inspiration of natural rights theory is very clear. Okay, but you would imagine this gets a certain amount of discussion in certain countries, okay? Wouldn't be a problem in Thailand, but in certain countries that's quite a big question. Now, that brings me to kind of, I suppose, a pragmatic point, okay? You might say to me, but surely some of these things are correlated among themselves, okay? Yeah, they probably are. So, statistically what we do is we say, okay, we're going to have these 5 indicators here, right? But we then use factor analysis, or principal component analysis, in order to try and work out how much each of these is contributing to what we're trying to measure. Factor analysis is a technique whereby if you've got a number of things which might be correlated among themselves, you're using them as measures. And it's a tool which allows you to establish how much in the overall thing you're measuring, each of these is contributing. Okay? So we use factor analysis to give weights to these as elements contributing to measure of value. Okay? And in the factor analysis, if something comes out with a very low weight, we can then take that indicator out and say it's not adding anything.
Which reference do you take?
I mean,
Which reference do you take?
well, in measuring this.
Yeah, or whatever the factors.
You just
Like
got
when you
factor.
give like
Sorry?
when you give a note or numbers, you give numbers based on the reference.
No, the factor analysis decides the weights. Okay? We just say we're trying to measure this thing, okay? Alright, we'll throw all these in. How much of the variation is explained by, how much of the variation of this is explained by this, how much by this, how much by this, how much by this, how much by this. Okay? Now, if two of these were perfectly correlated, one of them would have a 0 weight. Okay? I don't think you're going to call matrician, okay? But fundamentally, that's what we're doing. We're not assigning weights subjectively. No, we stay away from that. Okay? We let the factor analysis tell us which of these are actually adding to the explanation. Okay? And in fact, between 2014 and 2015, we moved from 54 to 52 indicators. And one reason was because we discovered that certain indicators, one of them was not adding anything, and the other we discovered was unreliable. Okay? So the factor analysis is run every year. Okay? Now, talking about weighting, so we don't run the factor analysis, and these things get a weight. And we come up with a measure for this nutritional basic inheritance here, which is scaled between 0 and 100. Every one of these we then scale between 0 and 100. Okay? 0 being the worst case, 100 being the theoretical best case. Okay? And then locate countries between 0 and 100 on each component. Okay, so we end up, therefore, we've done the factor analysis, we've done our scaling, worst case to theoretical best case. Okay? So we'll end up with a figure between 0 and 100 for that, figure between 0 and 100 for that, figure between 0 and 100 for that, and so on. We do not weight those. Okay? Now, that you might say is quite controversial. We said, oh, it's the same thing, say we give them all the same weight. Okay? Now, the reason for that is again, purely pragmatic. If we started discussing how important is this sort of being, how important is this, how important is this, how important is this, and trying to attach weights to them, I guarantee you that in 100 years' time we'd still be in the room discussing it. Okay? How important are these things relative to each other? People have different views, the world changes, technology changes, some of them are more money. So we said, well, I'll tell you what, we just give them all the same weight. Okay? So each of the 12 components have the same weight in the index. Okay? Now you might say it's arbitrary, it is to some extent arbitrary, but you know, if we start attaching weights to these, we get into a kind of subjective quagmire in which we would never exit. So we give them all the same weight. Okay? Alright, so that's the way the index is constructed, okay? Yeah, please.
Why women's average years in school? Why not equal, why not like an equal level? Because some societies are doing quite well. There's more women in education than men. And so saying that would, increase their score and opportunity, but it wouldn't seem to me social progress if you're leaving one gender behind. So why not expand?
Well, okay, men tend not to be left behind. Okay, if you're envisaging a world where men start to fall behind, we'd have to start including a measure for that, okay? So as things stand at present, that is...
Yeah, in many countries that's true, but for Thailand, for example, lots more women go to university than men.
In Thailand?
Yes.
That's interesting. Wow, so...
We have more women than men.
Sorry?
When you got, we have more women than men.
That's true. It doesn't count for the whole
Good point,
difference.
okay? I mean, you guys, the local experts, I don't know, it could be because of that. Yeah.
No, there's a much bigger gap than that in Thailand.
Right. That's an interesting point, Ross. I'm aware of that. We've assumed that's going to be a good indicator, which you could be right, okay? Maybe we need something different about that, okay? Thailand would probably score very high in that. We don't look at the scorecards of men and we see where it comes up. Okay? But throwing those kind of questions out, we welcome them, right? Because, what we keep constant are the 12 components, but we're open to changing these. They're only indicators which we're trying to use to measure these things. Okay? Or in this case, it's this one. So if you say, hey, that indicator is not measuring what you want it to do in certain countries, we'd say, okay, we'll change it. Okay? So the indicators we can change, and we're open to suggestion, as we go around the world with this, so you can say, well, that's not correct in our country for the categories we gave, okay? And so on. So maybe we want other indicators of access to higher education in Thailand, okay? And we'd say, fine, let's maintain, let's evolve, okay? So, and people might be worried and say, well, look, told homosexuals, in countries where there's virtue in homosexuality, okay, people might say, that's not an appropriate indicator, okay? And we could say, okay, all right, let's take it out, and let's use another indicator, okay? So, we're open to discussion on this, okay? And as I say, from 2014 to 2015, we have actually dropped indicators. Another thing to say, by the way, is this. One of the beauties of having 52 indicators, okay, is that you can afford to have one or two wrong ones. They won't destroy the index, okay? See, in human development index, there are 3 elements, or 4 in the inequality adjustment. If one of them is inaccurate, that does a big damage to the index. The index is all its accuracy. In SPI, with 52 indicators, so we can afford to get 1 or 2 wrong. It's not the end of the world. So in Malaysia, which is, by the way, about to adopt SPI as an official measure, okay, this one caused a certain amount of embarrassment, okay? But we managed to persuade them, look, at the end of the day, it's only one indicator, right? And it is an indicator of tolerance anyway, okay? Malaysia doesn't do too badly on this, okay? So, we're of the opinion that this index is definitive achievement, but then, of course, we wouldn't be in it if we didn't think it was, okay? But we are very open to discussion with the ministers. Remember I said earlier on, to get towards a universal index is very important, okay? Now, I know what you're all wanting to know. Now is how does the word rank on this, okay? Now, 2013 was the first time the index was prepared. Don't get too excited about those rankings because they were only 84 countries in the first iteration, okay? Much more telling, it's a 2014 index, okay? 132 countries in the index. The reason it's only 132 is because we have not got sufficiently reliable data for all 52 indicators for certain countries, okay? Singapore is not on the index, by the way, because a number of key things, we just haven't got reliable measures for Singapore. So if we haven't got reliable measures, we typically say we just cannot rank you, okay? But 2014 ranking, there we go, New Zealand, top of the world. Okay, who just said that? Casey's, okay? Second was Switzerland, third was Iceland, fourth was Netherlands, then Norway, then Sweden, then Canada, then Finland, then Denmark, and Australia. That's the SPI ranking in 2014. There was the GDP per capita of 2013. That's based on 2013 data, so these are comparable. And in terms of GDP 2013, Norway was top of the world, followed by USA, Switzerland, Ireland, UAE, Austria, Canada, Australia, Sweden, Germany. Okay? So, some of the big GDP countries are indeed top in SPI, but not all. Okay? USA is not in the top 10. United Arab Emirates is not in the top 10. Austria is not in the top 10. That was Germany in terms of SPI. So SPI is getting a different ranking from GDP, although not radically different.
I'm curious, what's for Germany? What's totally kind of Germany back?
Oh, we'll come to that in a moment. I've got scorecards to show you later, and we'll actually look at this in detail. And there, by the way, was the full picture for the world in 2014. Okay? And who wants to know where Thailand is? Okay, where is it?
It's 59.
Okay? Not doing too badly in terms of social progress. Okay? That sounds about right. That sounds about right for Thailand. Now, various other people in the room, various other parts of the world, you can see, after the top 10, very close to the top 10, because there's the absolute value of the index. You know, New Zealand at 88, Australia 86, for the between 0 and 100 of the index, Austria 85, then Germany, so Germany's not by far off, it's number 12. Okay, UK, Japan, okay, Ireland, surprise, surprise, well, maybe not. The United States is 16, Ireland beat the United States in SPI, okay? Belgium, Slovenia, Estonia, France, and so on, okay? If you look at those top 10 countries, what strikes you? That's a good point, actually. Apart from Australia, they're all cold. Yeah.
Small.
And small. Small is beautiful.
It's very small population, and not small.
Good man. Small, yes, not small space. Canada and Australia rent about both have lots of space. Now, that's it. Now, if you look at the bottom end of the index, well, check your story, Chad, Chad, Central African Republic, Burundi, Guinea, Sudan, Angola, Niger, Yemen. War, not surprising. Iraq is down here, that's because of war. Okay, because Iraq, in other respects, it's a relatively prosperous country, okay? But war is going to put down things like peace and security, it's going to destroy welfare systems.
Sorry, not enough for Bhutan, which started it all.
In Bhutan, no, Bhutan has their own index, and we haven't got the data for them. And I would very much like to bring Bhutan into the index, okay? Nepal, which is like the first cousin, I don't know if it's in that, it's in the 2015 index. Oh, it is, there we go, okay? Right, now that was 2014. Where was the 2015 ranking? Again, 132 countries, okay? And in 2015, Norway came first, then Sweden, Switzerland, Iceland, New Zealand, Canada, Finland, Denmark, Netherlands, Australia. It's the same top 10.
See, like Asian people is not quite wealthy.
Sorry?
See, like Asian people is not quite wealthy.
In terms of SPI, yeah. In terms of SPI, Asia is lower, okay? Now, I'm going to show you the relation between GDP and SPI at the moment, okay? Because, look, all of those are rich countries. And one thing that does come out of this, when we relate GDP to SPI, we discover that GDP does help, okay? Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just wondering, I'm listening to his comment about Asia, and I wonder how much of that goes back to the value judgments that were made at the beginning. Your entire team is Western, right? So Asian value judgments when setting up those indicators.
Well, we did pay attention. You down in the India, that's quite an Asian type value. Okay? But I think we're proof against that.
What about things like, looking at this, what about things like elderly care, right? Would be a very important Asian value.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's in our indicators. We're just back to indicators. Okay? Community safety net. There it is. Okay? We have an indicator for that.
I don't know if I would say this for my Thai friends and colleagues, right? The major importance of ensuring a happy old age for their parents, right? I don't know how you would talk about that in terms of a community safety net. In many ways, it's more important than kind of their own well-being, right?
Well, but one of the things we're measuring in that is the characteristics of extended family care. Now, you might say we need more indicators, and I would be very responsive to that, okay? But in principle, we do recognize that factor, and it's in that, okay? Community safety net doesn't necessarily mean state welfare. Look, we chose that word advisedly. We're measuring how, are old people looked after? Are our dependents looked after, okay? Or are they just abandoned to their fate? For example, France doesn't do too well at that, okay? Many old people live on the road, and their families abandoned them, okay?
Sorry. And then personal rights, right?
Yeah.
I say that's social progress. But here in Asia,
Self-actualization.
there's kind of a big trade-off on that. It's not as important to some people. That's a pretty Western value, personal rights, as opposed to societal rights.
You are completely right on that. It's one of the things which I think we're missing indicators on is social harmony. Okay? Because the trade-off between liberty and harmony, okay? If we allow the total expression of anything at all, okay? That can lead to dissent and it can lead to social tension and so on. Okay? But curiously though, Westerners think that they're absolutely dependent on in Western countries, hate speech is a crime. Okay? In France, you can go to prison for saying the Holocaust was a detail of history. Also freedom of speech. Okay, so any idea, that Westerners are that much better on freedom of speech is an illusion, okay? It just depends on what you're saying. Now, in Eastern societies, okay, China being the clearest example of this, okay, the Chinese Communist Party will say, yeah, we don't want discussion of certain topics because it will only create unnecessary disharmony, okay? Now, where you draw that balance is a good question. I agree that I'd like to see more harmony indicators in here, okay? These are important, okay? But maybe there's a little bit too much of the Western values over there. We've tried with these to talk about how tolerance is a harmony indicator. And you see, Thailand does very well in some of these, okay? Because tolerance does measure the harmony element, okay? So, that's the sort of discussion we welcome. And if we can think of indicators that can better measure tolerance and inclusion, there's one solution all about harmony. This is where the harmony is, it's in here, okay? So if you came along and said to us, we can think of better indicators, you'd say, great, let's use them. Okay? Right, now, let me see what 2015, you notice the top 10 are the same, they just moved around a bit. There were the GDP in 2014, by the way, Kuwait was top 10, Norway, England, Ireland, and so on. Okay? So, 2014, 2015, we've got the same set of countries, we've got a similar ranking. We regard that as good news, in the sense that we seem to be getting it about right. Okay? Because if the index was completely different from one year to the next, it's not like us. There's big statistical noise going on where we're not really getting it. But the fact that we're getting stability is encouraging. Okay? Now let me see if I can just briefly find a table. Spare me a minute. Oh, no, it won't be on this. Hang on. I'll show you that table in a minute. I'm just going to my memory stick and put some more slides here. Oh, we have it. Great. It's there. Right, let's move on to look then at, I thought this was there, yes, so, let's just now go a little bit more in practical detail and see how you could use this. But the first thing to look at would be the question of how does this thing relate to GDP? Because we've made a big thing about it, keeping GDP at an index. Let's see how it relates to it. Okay? First slide is just recalling our mind of what the elements in the index are. Okay? Country performance then. Let's see. If we put a little graph up with on the horizontal axis GDP per capita, on the vertical axis social purpose index, let's see how the countries pan out. Well, of course, Norway is high in GDP, high in social purpose index, okay? Bottom is Central African Republic this year, okay, 2015 data. There's New Zealand, okay? Significantly lower GDP, but almost the same level of social purpose as Norway, okay? There's Malawi, okay? Where's he put in? He's got very low GDP rate, like Central African Republic, but wow, much higher on social progress. There's Canada, okay? There's Great Britain, right? So you notice at the top, there are quite big variations in the GDP level for similar levels of SPI. There's the USA, France. We asked the BRICS countries, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, China, India. Okay, so the BRICS countries, obviously they've got somewhat lower GDP than the advanced countries, but quite big differences in SPI. Okay, Brazil doing much better than the rest of them. Russia being the highest GDP per head, that's something to do with their natural resource riches, okay, and not necessarily doing that well on SPI, okay. It's very surprising if you know Russia, okay. Kuwait is an outlier, okay. Top of the world in terms of GDP per head, very far from top of the world in terms of SPI. Not entirely surprising, I suppose. The other big outlier is Costa Rica. Okay, Costa Rica, there it is, it's got quite a low GDP per head, similar to that of Brazil, but it does extremely well on SPI. Okay, and there we are, there's the whole graph. If we just complete the graph, there's what it's going to look like. Okay?
So, do you think SPI
Yeah.
leads to higher GDP, or does higher GDP lead to better SPI?
Well, you know, we're not sure. Okay? That's just simple correlation analysis, okay? And you can never make it, it's difficult to make conclusions as which causes which without having a theory. We probably suspect that higher GDP helps you to have higher SPI when you're poor, okay? Because, you know, if, for example, you're a poor country and you increase GDP, you can do more on hospitals, you can do better education, okay? Because these things have resource costs, okay? So raising GDP means you can afford to have better hospitals, you can afford to have better schools and so on. So not surprisingly, when you're down here, there seems to be quite a strong relationship between social progress and GDP. But as you get richer, look what's happening. I mean, that correlation, it's 0.78. Okay, it's only a couple of years of data, but it's very clustered. Look how clustered it is. Okay? It's surprising. We can expect to find it like that. It's not a straight line relationship, that's for sure. Okay? It's a kind of curvy linear thing like this. Okay? Which means, therefore, that as you get richer and richer, it's much more difficult to increase SPI. Okay? So if you're out here, raising GDP typically has little impact on social progress, okay? So that's what comes out. So GDP and SPI are related, but the relationship is much stronger when you're very poor. It's kind of like Maslowian. You know, if you're living out in the jungle and so on, and you suddenly bought a few material comforts, wow, boof, up goes your well-being initially very quickly. But as you get more and more material things, adding to well-being becomes much more questionable, okay? Now, another thing you can do with the data is you can take individual components, many of the 12 components, and you can run correlations, okay? Now, these turn out to be not very clear at all. For example, these are just two, just shows at random. Health and wellness appears to have nothing to do with GDP, okay? You know, it's these little crosses here, all these averages, okay? They're all over the place, okay? There doesn't seem to be any relationship between health and wellness and GDP. Okay, so in other words, being a rich country doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be healthier or better, okay? At all, there's no relationship at all, okay? Ecosystem sustainability, another one we just put for illustration, that's even worse, okay? There's absolutely no relationship. Look, they're everywhere, okay? Everywhere, all right? So, relationship between specific components and GDP is often non-existent, okay? It's often non-existent. You would take any component you like to do the same kind of correlation analysis with it, okay? Another thing that you can look at is the question of whether countries are overperforming or underperforming in relation to GDP. Okay? That is to say, you look at the country's position in the GDP ranking, you look at its position in the SPI ranking. It's called an overperformer if it's higher on SPI than the GDP. It's called an underperformer if it's lower on SPI than the GDP. Well, not surprisingly, the strongest overperformer is Costa Rica, much higher on SPI than you would expect given its GDP rank. Okay? Uruguay, Moldova, Nicaragua, New Zealand, Mauritius, and so on. Okay? Moldova is an interesting one. It's a small little country in Europe, sandwiched in between Ukraine and Romania. Okay? And yeah, it overperforms in social progress, but that probably is because of underperformance in GDP. Okay? Moldova is the poorest country in Europe by a long shot. Okay? Right? So, it's got very poor growth and so on. Okay? But its social structures are fairly good. Now, there's something interesting lying behind that. Moldova was an ex-Soviet bloc country in the Soviet Socialist republics, okay? And many of those countries have still in place good education systems and good health systems. And, you know, there are not many people living in abject poverty, okay? But they're quite egalitarian. Okay, so Moldova is helped by that. It's low on GDP, but it has a kind of a heritage coming from the old Soviet bloc countries, okay? So that probably explains why that's there, okay? Costa Rica and Uruguay, interesting, okay? They really overperform on SPI, okay? Nepal, by the way, doesn't do too badly in terms of SPI, given its level of GDP per head, okay? Now the underperformers, there they are, okay? Biggest underperformer is Saudi Arabia. You know, ghastly SPI in relation to what its GDP is. Angola, Iraq, easily explained by war, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia's inequalities in the income and wealth that show up in many of the other indicators, okay? So, there are some of the comparisons you can make. And then the final element to show you what's called country scorecards. Okay? Now these can be often a good discussion point. This is what the scorecard looks like. And basically, we take the components and so on, and we see for each component how the country is performing in relation to those who are closest in terms of GDP. In other words, we're saying the level of GDP per head tells you something about how much social progress you can afford. To the point earlier about the resource kind of question. Okay? So we take the 15 countries that are closest to whatever country you're looking at in terms of GDP per head. Because that tells us, well, you know, this country has so much GDP, it should be able to have a certain level of social progress, okay? And we then compare for each component how you're doing in relation to your 15 peers, if you like. It's not like a peer evaluation.
This kind of thing with the social distribution of food policy from country.
Could be. Like it often is. Yeah. There is an example. Afghanistan. Okay? I'll show you both. Now look at the way it did that, just to show you quickly how it works, okay? We take 15 countries which have similar level of GDP, and they're listed down there for Afghanistan. Benin, Tanzania, Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, Nepal, Senegal, Madagascar, Rwanda, Uganda, Togo, Tajikistan, Lesotho, Guinea. They're the 15 comparators. Now those countries have a level of GDP per head very close to what Afghanistan has. And then we say, how is Afghanistan doing in relation to those 15 in terms of each component? Okay? Where there's a yellow, it means it's doing more or less the same. It's within a certain standard deviation of what the other 15. Where it's red, it means it's underperforming in relation to them. Where it's green, it means it's overperforming in relation So, for example, Afghanistan, not entirely surprisingly, gets a lot of reds in relation to its 15 comparators on personal safety. Okay? Not entirely surprising, okay? Because there's a certain amount of war and something going on there, okay? So that's the meaning of that. This thing here tells you that you know, Afghanistan does well in terms of availability of affordable housing. That's probably because the real estate is cheap, by the way, okay? And access to electricity is good, okay? In relation to its peers, okay? Because if you start comparing Afghanistan with Germany, of course Germany is going to outperform in most things. It's an advanced country, okay? So we take the 15 countries at a similar level of development. Now, let's have a look at some other countries quickly that might interest people in the room. We've got to go, yeah? Okay, that's no problem. If there's any country that you, as we go past, that you want to stop and look at, just say. Oh, look at Brazil, just don't pass on. Okay? And we know Brazil is generally tends to be overperformed, okay? But let's look at the countries first of all that are its comparators. We're comparing it with countries similar GDP, which are Botswana, Montenegro, Iraq, Thailand, Bulgaria, Costa Rica, Iran, Algeria, Mauritius, Mexico, Serbia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and South Africa. Now, where Brazil has a red, that means that in terms of these things, it's doing less well than its comparators. Personal safety is where Brazil does badly. Okay? Yes, it is a dangerous country. We get murdered easily, right? Okay? All the Americas, by the way, North and South, are much more violent than Europe or Asia. Okay, so they tend to do quite badly on these personal safeties. Okay? Brazil is doing similarly to its comparators in most things, okay? But it has grades up here for things like tolerance for homosexuals. Yes, we know that. Brazil has a huge gay and transsexual community. It's also very tolerant in terms of anything to do with sex and sexual discrimination, okay? And it also has some world-class universities, okay? So they're the things that, the yellows mean that there's nothing particularly spectacular it's doing similar to its comparators, okay? In Cambodia might be of interest, not very far from Thailand, of course, okay? Now the comparators are Djibouti, Mauritania, Bangladesh, Cameroon, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Lesotho, Tajikistan, Senegal, Nepal, Chad, Ghana, Zambia, Afghanistan, Guinea. In other words, Cambodia is a relatively poor country, okay? So when we compare its social progress in relation to its level of GDP, it has a number of green scattered around the place. It does well in child mortality, death from infectious diseases. It does well in terms of affordable housing, people on housing. It does rather well in terms of homicide rate, although there is a certain amount of violent decline. It does well on ecosystem sustainability in general. It does well in obesity, good food, and so on. Okay, and plenty of some greens over here too. So you can see the way you can use these. Okay. Thailand. Oh, China's an interesting one. Okay. Now China, the comparator of Tunisia, Peru, Egypt, Albania, Ecuador, Macedonia, Jordan, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Bosnia, Namibia, South Africa, Indonesia, Jamaica, Sri Lanka. In relation to those countries, okay, Canada has one green, which is for level of violent crime, okay, but curiously, perceived criminality is quite high. Perceived criminality means asking people, do you think there's a lot of crime? Do you feel safe? Chinese tend to say they don't particularly, okay, which is kind of surprising because in reality, they do very well in violent crime figures, okay? Where China has reds are two places here. Look at this, right? Outdoor air pollution, yeah, that's not a surprise. Suicide rate, yeah, we know that in recent years there have been a certain amount of suicides in some factories in China. That's being picked up there. The suicide rate is a bit of a red spot for China, as also is the obesity rate, okay? Chinese getting richer, eating lots of bad food, okay? and thereby they increase, okay? But of course, where China gets lots of reds is here, tough, okay? On the freedom of rights, freedom of speech type stuff, and so on. Of course, China would say, well, wait a minute, you know, we believe in social harmony, right? But even in terms of the inclusion indicators, it does okay in terms of community safety now. Not terribly well in terms of levels of tolerance, okay? So, that's where China scored. By the way, up here you'll always have telling you the social progress index ranked 92 and the GDP ranked 70. That means that China underperforms in relation to its GDP. Okay? It's second in the world in GDP, 92nd in terms of SPI. Okay? So let's, Costa Rica, by the way, plenty of greens, we know that they've underperformed. What these greens and reds tell you is, you know, where is the country doing very well, but also where is it weak in relation to its peers. And the reds are like a policy guideline, okay? They're telling you where a government could usefully intervene. Okay, so let's get to Thailand and see where Thailand is doing in this. If we plot on Malaysia, then we'll we can make these slides available to you. Incidentally, all of the social progress index stuff is available free on the web. It's one of our principles is that all the material is available free, okay? So I'm looking at India and Indonesia, by the way, just on myself, okay? India, in relation to countries within our GDP, doesn't actually do too badly. All the basic stuff is pretty good. It has reds here with suicide rates and outdoor air pollution. It has reds over here with religious intolerance, okay? But it does quite well on the freedom of speech type stuff, okay? Which kind of fits with what you expect in India. Here's Indonesia, okay? Comparatives with Jamaica, Sri Lanka, Namibia, Ukraine, Bosnia, and so on. And now, if you were talking to Joe, you'd say to him, look, Joe, this is telling you areas where you, in relation to your level of GDP, you could be doing things. Here. That's easy, that's uncontroversial. You could go and say to them, look, there's a weakness in policy here, it's not particularly controversial area, you could do something about that. Here, you could do something about this. Okay? Access to internet and so on. This, more difficult to deal with politically, so you might steer clear of that. But you know, you can use this scorecard to identify the red areas, and that can give suggestions for policy action. Okay? And as I say, sometimes there are pretty uncontroversial things that come up that you could say, right, we need to get into action on those. Okay? Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Jordan, Pakistan, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Laos. Laos is also an ASEAN member. There are years where areas where Laos will be doing things. Sorry? What's Latvia? Okay? There's the areas, but biggest one for Laos is there, but we've got greens down here. Okay? That's Laos, Latvia, Lebanon, Lesotho, Nigeria, Somalia, Estonia, Malawi.
Where does that tolerance for homosexuals number come from?
As far as I recall, down to one pole. It's down to one pole.
Okay, because we do work in Laos with HIV communities.
All right.
And I would not say that the government is not particularly tolerant. They think like HIV doesn't exist.
There are countries like that, yeah. Okay. But I would go check. I mean, if you question about that, for every one of these effects, you can say which one it is. And off the top of my head, I think it's got a bubble. I could be wrong about that. Okay. Malaysia, and there we are. Now remember, Malaysia has quite a level of GDP per head, so it's being compared with some countries like Poland, Chile, Hungary, Russia, which are relatively advanced countries. So bearing that in mind, If you were talking to the Malaysian government, you say, look, they've got reds here, okay, in relation to access to basic knowledge. That's an uncontroversial thing. You could say to the ministers, look, you should be doing something about that. This, of course, is more controversial in Malaysia. Tolerance for immigrants and tolerance for homosexuals, okay? You might steer clear of that, okay? This is relatively controversial in Malaysia, although it's in theory a parliamentary democracy, okay? But notice that there are still things which you could say, which are pretty much uncontroversial, you could say the ministers should be working on these, okay? Right, let's see if we can find Thailand now, which doesn't do too badly at all there in this. Paraguay, by the way, has adopted the index as a government indicator. It's formally part of the government's arsenal of indicators in the case of Paraguay, okay? So, we're blocked. What's up there? Oh, it's still loading the name of this. We can't get to Thailand. Oh my goodness. Or something like that. While we're waiting for Thailand to load, any other comments or questions on this?
As you said, each year you have to do factor analysis, right?
Yes? Each year, sorry?
You have to do a factor analysis, meaning changing indicator every year.
It could be changing indicators every year, but what we're hoping is to get to a situation where they stabilise. Okay? Because we're at a relatively early stage, I think it's in the 30 index, okay? We're trying to we hope that within about another 2 or 3 years, the set of indicators will have settled down.
Right.
Okay. But regardless of the strengths that we can change the indicators, right? Because remember that the other thing is, of course, as society evolves, we may need new indicators as social practices change and so on. You know, for example, 20 years ago, the internet usage or access to internet would have no relevance as an indicator at all, and today it has. Are we back on in action at all? Right, yeah. So that's the view we take on that. Yeah.
How is SBI funded?
SBI funded is entirely funded through Skull Foundation and various other sponsors, okay? But it's a very small team. It's just incredibly small. For example, my contribution to SBI is entirely voluntary. Okay, source of repositories and source of Stearns. Okay? We just do it as part of our research. Okay? So it is working with an incredibly small budget. Okay? That may change in the future. Okay? But you see, if you think about it, if a country decides that it will adopt SBI, okay, anybody can calculate it. You can go on the website and see how it's done. Okay? Which does raise the question, in the long term, might people go and construct SBIs that were maybe manipulated? That's a good question. I raised that question with Michael Porter last Christmas when I was in Albert. And he said, yeah, that could be a problem long term. So what we may eventually do is go to a situation where we say, okay, any country that wants to use SBI, they need to have our stamp of approval. okay, to say this is a genuine SPI, it's not manipulated. We don't envisage any more than that. A bit like, university degrees where, there's some authority that says, yes, this is the real thing, it's not a fake degree. Okay? So some kind of an accreditation thing we probably will eventually get to. Okay? Now let me see if we can find it here.
While you're waiting,
Yes?
do you hope to get any feedback from each country that you did the evaluation?
Oh yes. We welcome feedback. We want feedback. Okay? Probably would like countries to begin to use the index as a series of units. We are very open to feedback. Okay? I think that an interesting project would be to get the SPI used in ASEAN. Okay? Malaysia is already just sort of beginning to use them. Okay? And the ASEAN countries, actually they don't do too badly on SPI. We haven't got Singapore in there because we haven't got enough data, but Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia, I think Vietnam is in there as well. Let me just see where we're at. Oh yeah, yes. Now, here we go. Here's Thailand. At last we have it. There we go. Right. No. There we go. All right. So there's how Thailand does. Notice, SPI rank is 57, GDP rank is 58. Okay. So where are the reds in Thailand? Okay. Now look at the comparative countries that are Iraq, Costa Rica, Montenegro, Algeria, Serbia, Botswana, Brazil, South Africa, Colombia, Dominican, Venezuela, and Fairbanks, and Mauritius. There's not a single ASEAN state in there, which tells you something about the big differences in level of GDP per head in ASEAN. Okay? In other words, the countries that are closest to Thailand don't include any other ASEAN state. But that's because, that's similar GDP per head levels, okay? Now, Thailand has some reds, okay? Some of which the government could easily act on, okay? Non-controversial politically like these, okay? Obesity rate, yeah, interestingly becoming an issue in Thailand. You probably knew that anyway, with all these fast food joints, okay? Right? Outdoor air pollution and trips per net, that's to do with the traffic, okay? Suicide rate, surprisingly, in relation to its peers, is a bit of a bright spot in Thailand, okay? Traffic deaths, well, that's kind of well known, you probably knew that. Political terror, that reflects some of the problems down in the south, okay? Okay. Now, on this stuff here, Thailand doesn't do too badly at all in that. Okay, so you can have a military regime and do quite reasonably on some of the rights stuff. Okay, so political rights and freedom of speech, rights for very obvious reasons. Freedom of assembly, freedom of private property, they're all fine. And there's even a green for freedom of life choice, freedom over life choices. There's a green there for community safety. Tolerance is similar to that in relation to its peers. Some problems of religious intolerance. Guess where that's coming from? Okay, we know. And it has a green, Thailand also has a green community safety net, what you were making earlier on, and a number of globally ranked universities, good universities in Thailand, basically, okay? So, Thailand doesn't do too badly on this, okay? It's, and that seems like a reasonable description, doesn't it? That's not wildly inaccurate, indeed, far from it, okay? So that's how you can use these scorecards, okay? They can be a very useful input for policy for a government in the long term. And this is to say, what we'd like ultimately to get to is a situation where all of the countries in the world are using SPI as an indicator, okay? That will involve a dialogue, I think, with the creators and many of the other indicators, and we're completely open to that.
Why don't you use the approach that has a people between the weights between this
Well, the reason for that is, like I said earlier, you could have a situation where all sorts of intolerances are being built into the way people rate things, okay? Things that you might think are actually not very good for well-being. So, for example, in a country like France, okay, there's a lot of intolerance in relation to the Muslim minority, okay? People, for example, that might start raising things about their living and so on as a function of the presence of Muslims and so on, okay? So in other words, if you let people make value judgments, okay, people at large, okay, you may often get all sorts of crazy prejudice. Just look at the internet sometimes, just do a random search for things. And just look at how much nonsense is out there, okay? People with all sorts of extreme views, splicing them, you know? Now, if you allow people like that to sort of determine an interest, okay, I would have reservations about them. I know the attraction, so it's very sensible. Let people decide, okay? But the people don't always necessarily know what's right and wrong, okay? I'm not saying I do, but I'm saying somebody should come from philosophers or the like, okay? It should come from wisdom. So that's my worry, okay?
So this index is a kind of objective index, right?
Oh yeah. We've made judgments based on natural rights, okay, and on ideas of the middle path, okay. Eudaimonia, as I said earlier, is definitely called the index of eudaionic index. So that's to say, it must be based on middle path type values. And we want natural rights in there because, in theory, every country in the world subscribe to natural rights. See, the natural rights you can see, for example, here. For example, right to basic medical care, right to shelter. Okay, these are all sorts of things that are associated with Declaration of Human Rights, as are these things. Okay, so yeah, we're trying to base it on. Objective is a tricky word when you're talking about anything this. We want to base it on philosophical value judgments. Okay? We want to draw on philosophy and wisdom, okay, in order to base the value judgments. Okay.
This applies the rate on the depth of food deficit. What is the actual measurement?
I'd have to check that. That would definitely have come from either Food and Agriculture Organization or World Health Organization, okay? It would be from one of those, one of the UN indices, because they have measures on that, okay? It's calories of undernourished persons, okay? But if you go to the Circuit Progress website, you can check where that figure comes from. For every figure, it can tell you where it actually comes from, okay? But that would definitely be a UN one.
But interestingly, I think the Malaysian slide also showed the same two red dots or squares.
Did it?
Yes.
And also, yeah, what if you put this
on both infectious disease and the death of food deficit.
Yeah.
So I was a bit surprised in Malaysia and Thailand have these similar.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that, I mean...
Anyway,
yeah, but certainly those figures there, they come from UN sources, okay? And remember what we're saying. It's read in relation to the peers. So it's in relation to Australia, Montenegro, Algeria, Serbia, Botswana, because you see, what this column here, which I didn't say much about, okay, tells you something about where Thailand is in relation to the whole of 132 countries in respect of that indicator. So, for example, Thailand is 57 in SBI, 58 in GDP, but it's 77th in the world on objective food deficit. Okay? So that already tells you you're doing less well than most of the rest of the world in that. Okay? And so on. So whereas in something like availability of affordable housing, Thailand is up there with the best. Okay? It's like in shares one rank with a lot of other countries, okay?
Like, basic human needs and foundations of well-being, I think it's difficult to kind of argue with that. There's not a lot of judgments in there. Opportunity is the one where it gets a little bit more.
Yeah, it's more difficult, but it is important.
I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm just thinking. So where is economic opportunity? How come economic opportunity is not there?
Because we're saying economic well-being has nothing to do with well-being. Economic prosperity has nothing to do with it. We want to keep economics out of it, but there is that.
Okay, I guess what I'm thinking of if you look in a lot of societies, you can educate women, right?
Yep.
But if they can't get a job,
Yeah.
right?
You've actually raised an interesting point there about employment. There's nothing in the index on employment either. Okay, but by the way, there is that. And that has something to do with economic freedom. Okay? But economic freedom, we say, is not a contributor to well-being. Okay? It tells you something about the economy, but it doesn't tell you necessarily about well-being. But private property rights are an important part of freedom. Okay? Now, employment. The European Union definitely would like this to include employment. Okay? We've said up to this point, employment is not actually part of well-being. It's a bit like including GDP. Okay? But the Commissioner is saying that, well, look at the reality in Europe today. There are lots of countries with, youth unemployment of 25%. That's 1/4 of young people beyond the age of 25 between voting age 30 without jobs. Hey, that's not very good for their well-being. And by the way, the Declaration of Human Rights includes the right to work. So we're beginning to have second thoughts on that, and we probably will include a quality of employment indicator in the future, which would be interesting because that's a bit like Bhutan. But Bhutan has that. Okay? And come in here somewhere. Okay, so I think that's something that will evolve in the future. And it's a good example of how we're listening and dialoguing with interested parties saying, yeah, maybe you have a point, maybe we need to. So I was talking to Mike Green last weekend, and he thinks we should include it, and we often run past me as a philosopher, and I think, yeah, I can see the argument. Yeah.
Well, that's what I see, there's several attempts to bring women into the opportunity scale.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious why it isn't under inclusion. You've got immigrants, homosexuals, minorities, but you don't have women.
We had an indicator in here in 2014, which was taken from the Gallup Moral Poll, which was women treated with respect. Okay? And we eventually decided it wasn't a terribly reliable indicator, because the top country in the world was Saudi Arabia. So there was something slightly perhaps wrong here. Now, actually, I talked to some Muslim students in Cardiff about this, not in Grenoble about this, and I said, that's interesting, we discovered this. And they said, oh yes, that's not so surprising, because they said to me that, once a Saudi woman has born a child, she will be looked after for the rest of her life, okay, by whoever the proud father is and so on, okay? So, Saudi women do feel they're treated with respect. Can't argue with that, okay? But we thought that that wasn't quite picking up what we intended to pick up, right? Which was more about real opportunities for women, okay? So Saudi women do feel treated with respect. So we took that out. We said, okay, it's not measuring quite what we wanted to do, which was opportunities for women. Okay, but wasn't that interesting? So, in the future, perhaps we'll have other indicators on that. But for the moment, we haven't got it. Okay?
But you could look at things like women's participation in government.
You could do. I mean, we have the years in school, but yeah, I mean, you could. But there's also the question made earlier on that in some countries,
maybe their participation in university education is something which, for example, in Thailand, for a war haven, right? So, okay, but I suppose that would mean that Thailand would be top of the scale on that. Okay? Yeah?
About the correlation between these index and happiness level.
Oh, the word haven't, we haven't done that yet. We'd like to do that. I mean, with only 10 people on the team, there's only so much you can do. But as Michael Porter says, there are at least 100 PhDs which could be written on various aspects of this, okay? Related to world happiness, report relating it to Happy Planet Index and so on. It doesn't correlate well with Happy Planet, okay? I know that for sure, I just look at the rankings, okay? But then Happy Planet only claims to be a measure in relation to environment. It doesn't claim to be a whereas World Happiness Report does claim to be a comprehensive index, so it would be interesting to look at based on that. Incidentally, the Gallup World Poll does have a measure of pure subjective happiness, okay? And now it's narrower than the World Happiness Report because it's just subjective happiness, but while I was preparing some of this, I was looking at Gallup World Poll, and there's some interesting things in there. In terms of people feeling happy, living your life, yes, I'm feeling happy both today and broadly with my life. Guess where the happiest countries in the world are? Just on a pure, narrow happiness, no GP or anything included. Happiest countries are where? Latin America. The top 10 are all Latin American countries. Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, they feel really happy. Square, some Brazilians, oh yes, life is good. Despite all those homicide. But interestingly, Thailand and Philippines are also very close to the top. Okay? Europeans, I'm afraid not. And also Singaporeans, they're very happy. Isn't that interesting? In terms of pure feeling happy, well, we know Thais are happy, and I read that, yeah, that fits. Filipinos, yeah. So, so the results from that suggest to me, yeah, those are pretty reasonable answers. So, personal happiness is high down in this part of the world, except in Singapore. I don't know what that means for the way ASEAN should develop, but okay. But it's an interesting sort of fact, okay? Right, any other thoughts on that?
Might be interesting to see geographic clusters uplifting in Thailand, so I was looking at ASEAN over the years.
Well, it'd be very interesting to develop this comparison to all of ASEAN. That's something I'd love to do, okay? And indeed for the EU countries as well. The regional blocks would be very interesting to see. ASEAN will be very interesting because it's so heterogeneous. Okay? But in terms of happiness, it produces a picture of quite happy people. Okay? But yeah, there are two things to do for the future. Okay? We need to get a research centre going. So I want to talk to Nick about that. Okay? Any other thoughts?
Thailand is number one on the field.
Oh yeah, it is. One means it's up with the best in the world on a number of things. Okay.
They need mobile phones.
Oh, yeah, that's not surprising. Yeah, that's not surprising. That means it's got a level as high as the best in the world. Okay. Maybe not absolutely the highest, but up at the top 10. But then, yeah, well, you know that. Just look at the BTS, you see it. Almost everybody in Thailand has a phone.
There's actually more than one person in the numbers.
Really? Oh, so that's not entirely surprising. But it does mean important. In Africa, access to mobile phones is very important in terms of access to banking and all these kind of stuff. So that's why we have the access to the mobile phones in there. Okay? You might say to me, hey, Patrick, that's an input indicator, right? Yeah, it could be, but we're saying no, it directly contributes to people's well-being. Okay? But you could discuss that. Okay? You could discuss that. Okay? This is maybe
Well, I guess one implication of that is that
yeah.
how access the mobile phone can help you address all the red dots.
Yeah,
Mobile technology to address some of those weaknesses.
You certainly could. You know, you can use it to address some of the health issues, for example. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So all you have to do now is go out and convince your friends in Thailand who take them to the fund. They need to use this index, adopt it. It's costless to adopt it. The data are there. All they've got to do, we're all advising people to use as an indicator, not to replace GDP, but to go alongside GDP. Also, it can be a very useful policy tool. It can show them where the countries are underperforming. Okay. Any other questions?